The crimson glow of Zephyria Prime's twin suns cast long shadows across the marble halls of the Galactic Council chambers. Ambassador Elena Voss adjusted her diplomatic uniform, the silver insignia of Earth's delegation catching the alien light as she walked toward what would either be humanity's greatest triumph or its final betrayal. Another day, another species trying to wipe us out, she muttered under her breath, her fingers unconsciously tracing the scar that ran along her left temple. A reminder of Kepler 442b. A reminder of why she had retired from her previous profession. The towering doors of the assembly hall groaned open, revealing the vast amphitheater where representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered. At the center, upon a throne that seemed to devour light itself, sat King Malachar of the Dominion fleet. His obsidian skin rippled with bioluminescent patterns, and his 4 eyes gleamed with the cold intelligence of a predator who had never known defeat. "Ah, the human arrives," Malachar's voice boomed across the chamber, each word dripping with disdain. "How quaint." Elena smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "Your Majesty, such a warm welcome. I do hope the feeling is mutual." The alien king's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Around them, delegates from a crystalline hegemony, the Void Walkers, and dozens of other species watched with barely concealed anticipation. Everyone knew why she was here. The humans had been granted one final chance to prove their worth to the galactic community before being declared a threat to universal peace. "Let's dispense with pleasantries," Malachar said, rising from his throne. His massive form towered 12 feet above the chamber floor. "Your species has shown remarkable resilience in your expansion across the stars. Some might call it aggression." "Funny," Elena replied, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "I was about to say the same thing about yours." A ripple of shocked silence spread through the assembled delegates. No one spoke to King Malachar with such casual disrespect. Not if they wanted to continue existing. The king's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a deeper, more ominous hue. "You mistake my patience for weakness, Ambassador. Your species stands accused of violations against the Galactic Accords. Unauthorized terraforming, aggressive expansion, the systematic elimination of indigenous life forms." Elena's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Rich words from someone whose empire spans half the galaxy. "But please continue. I do enjoy good performance." "Enough!" Malachar's roar shook the chamber. "You will show respect, or you will face the consequences." "Consequences?" Elena's smile widened, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something that made the nearest delegates unconsciously step back. "Your Majesty, I do believe you've mistaken me for someone who gives a damn about your consequences." The king's 4 eyes narrowed. He had expected fear, submission, perhaps desperate bargaining. Instead, this human woman stood before him with the casual confidence of someone who had stared death in the face and found it lacking. "Guards," Malachar commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Escort the ambassador to the detention levels. Perhaps some time in contemplation will improve her manners." 8 of the king's elite warriors emerged from the shadows, their plasma weapons humming to life. Each stood 9 feet tall, cybernetically enhanced, and had never failed in their duty to the crown. Elena didn't move. She simply stood there, watching as they approached, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said conversationally, "I tried really hard to leave that life behind. Became a diplomat. Learned to use words instead of other methods. But some people just make it so difficult." The lead guard reached out to grab her arm. His hand never made contact. Elena's movement was so fast, it seemed to blur reality itself. One moment she was standing passively, the next the guard was on the ground, his weapon in her hands, his armband at an impossible angle. The plasma rifle whined as she adjusted the settings with practiced ease. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Did I not mention? I used to have a different job before this whole diplomacy thing." The remaining guards opened fire. Elena was already moving, her body flowing like liquid mercury between their shots. Plasma bolts scorched the marble where she had been standing, but she was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost dancing through their ranks. The second guard fell as she drove her elbow into his throat. the sickening crack audible throughout the chamber. The third managed to get off 2 shots before she relieved him of his weapon and his consciousness simultaneously. "Stop this," Malachar bellowed, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty now. "You are in violation of diplomatic immunity." Elena paused, a guard's weapon in each hand. Her diplomatic uniform somehow still pristine despite the chaos. Diplomatic immunity? She tilted her head, considering, didn't you just order my arrest? I'm pretty sure that voids the whole immunity thing. The 4th guard tried to flank her. She senses movement without looking, spinning to deliver a kick that sent him flying into the chamber wall with bone-crushing force. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent hall. "Besides," she continued, as if discussing the weather, "I'm pretty sure threatening to execute an entire species also violates a few accords. But what do I know? I'm just a woman diplomat." King Malachar's bioluminescent patterns were now pulsing with rage and something else, something that looked suspiciously like fear. "What are you?" Elena's smile turned predatory. "Oh, that's a wonderful question, Your Majesty. You see, before I became Earth's finest diplomat, I had a rather different career. Some call me a ghost. Others call me a myth. But most—" She paused, her eyes going completely cold. "Most just call me Baba Yaga." The name hit the chamber like a physical blow. Delegates who had been watching with detached interest suddenly found pressing reasons to examine their feet. Even the crystalline representatives, who had no concept of human folklore, seemed to sense a shift in the room's atmosphere. "Impossible," Malachar whispered. "The Baba Yaga is a legend, a bedtime story humans tell to frighten their children." "Legends," Elena said, casually snapping the neck of the 5th guard who had been trying to creep up behind her, "have to start somewhere." The remaining 3 guards looked to their king, uncertainty written across their alien features. Malachar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "You want to know what I did before becoming a diplomat?" Elena continued, her voice taking on a conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than any threat. "I was a problem solver. The kind of problems that kept galactic leaders awake at night. The kind that made entire star systems go very, very quiet." She took a step forward, and King Malachar actually retreated. The most powerful being in 3 sectors, commander of 1 billion ships, master of countless worlds, backing away from a single human woman. "I was very good at my job," Elena said. "Exceptionally good. So good that people started calling me other names. The Ghost of Centauri, the Widowmaker, the thing that goes bump in the night on space stations." Another step forward, another step back from the king. "But I got tired of all the violence, all the death. So I retired, became a diplomat, learned to solve problems with words instead of weapons. It was peaceful, quiet. I rather liked it." The 6th guard made the mistake of trying to fire on her while she was talking. Elena's response was surgical in its precision. The guard's weapon flew from his hands, followed immediately by the guard himself flying in the opposite direction. "But here's the thing about retirement," Elena continued, as if nothing had happened. "It's really only retirement if people let you stay retired. And you, Your Majesty, seem determined to drag me back into my old profession." King Malachar's retreat had brought him back to his throne, but instead of sitting, he found himself pressed against its dark surface. This is impossible. You're just one human, one woman." Elena's laugh was soft, almost musical. "Just one woman? Oh, Your Majesty, you really haven't been paying attention, have you? Do you know what I did to the hegemony fleet at Rigel? What happened to the Void Walker invasion force at Proxima?" The king's patterns were now cycling through colors that suggested pure terror. That was an entire battle group. 50,000 ships. 53,000 for 112, Elena corrected. But who's counting? The point is, I tried to warn them. Just like I tried to warn you. But some people just don't listen. The 7th guard had been edging toward the chamber's emergency alert system. Elena's thrown weapon caught him in the chest, sending him sprawling across the marble floor. "You see, the thing about being Baba Yaga," she said, walking slowly toward the throne, "is that it's not just a job. It's not just a reputation. It's a promise. A guarantee. You threaten humanity. You threaten my people. You threaten me." She paused, her eyes now completely devoid of warmth. "Well, that's when the legendary problem solver comes out of retirement. The final guard, showing more wisdom than his compatriots, quietly set down his weapon and backed away with his hands visible." Elena nodded approvingly. "Smart boy. I do appreciate intelligence." King Malachar pressed himself further against his throne. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Elena's voice was dangerously quiet. "I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that humanity sent a diplomat to these talks, not an assassin. I want you to remember that we tried to solve this peacefully." She was close enough now that Malachar could smell the faint scent of ozone that seemed to cling to her, could see the way her eyes reflected light, like a predator's. "And I want you to remember that if you ever threaten my species again, I will personally ensure that your death becomes a new legend whispered throughout the galaxy." The chamber was dead silent. 1,000 beings from across the stars watched as the most powerful ruler in known space cowered before a human woman who looked like she could have been someone's grandmother. "Now," Elena said, her voice returning to its diplomatic tone, "shall we discuss the terms of humanity's continued membership in the Galactic Council? Because I have a feeling we're going to reach a very reasonable agreement." King Malachar's patterns flickered weakly as he nodded, his 4 eyes never leaving her face. Around them, the other delegates began to murmur among themselves, their voices carrying a new note of respect when they mentioned the human representative. But Elena wasn't finished. Not by a long shot, because in trying to eliminate humanity's voice in the galaxy, King Malachar had made a fundamental error. He had awakened something that had been sleeping peacefully in the halls of diplomacy. He had awakened the Baba Yaga. And legends, once awakened, are very difficult to put back to sleep. The silence in the chamber stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Elena Voss stood before the cowering King Malachar, her diplomatic smile never wavering despite the unconscious guard scattered around her like broken dolls. The assembled delegates from across the galaxy held their collective breath, waiting to see what the legendary Baba Yaga would do next. "So," Elena said, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from her sleeve, "about those peace negotiations. I believe we were discussing humanity's continued participation in galactic affairs." King Malachar's bioluminescent patterns flickered erratically, cycling through colors that suggested confusion, fear, and desperate calculation. You cannot simply threaten the entire Galactic Council. There are protocols, laws, procedures. Elena's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Protocols? Laws? How fascinating. Were you following protocols when you ordered the sterilization of the Terran colonies at Kepler 442b? Because I seem to recall that particular operation being rather extrajudicial. The mention of Kepler 442b sent a visible shudder through the chamber. Every delegate present knew the story. An entire human settlement, wiped out in a single night. No survivors, no witnesses, no official record of what had happened. "That was a military necessity," Malachar stammered, his 4 eyes darting around the chamber as if seeking support. "The humans were expanding too aggressively. We had to send a message." "A message," Elena repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast hall. "You sent a message to 30,000 civilians. Men, women, children. Do you know what their message back to you was? Your Majesty." She began walking slowly around the throne, her movements predatory and precise. "Their message was screamed into the void as your ships turned their homes to glass. Their message was written in the blood of families torn apart by your military necessity." The king's mandibles clicked rapidly, a nervous habit that betrayed his growing panic. "You cannot blame me for the actions of war. These things happen. Casualties are inevitable." "Casualties," Elena mused, her tone thoughtful. Such a clinical word. So much more palatable than massacre or genocide, don't you think? "Tell me, Your Majesty, did you sleep well after Kepler 442b? Did you dream of the children's voices?" Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The crystalline representative from Altair actually began to emit a low, harmonic hum that suggested deep distress. I did what was necessary for the stability of the galaxy, Malachar said, but his voice lacked conviction. The humans were becoming too powerful, too dangerous. Elena stopped directly in front of him, her eyes boring into his four-eyed gaze. Too dangerous? You want to know what dangerous looks like, Your Majesty? Dangerous is what happened to Admiral Krex after Kepler 442b. Dangerous is what happened to General Vorth. Dangerous is what happened to every single officer who participated in that operation. The King's patterns went completely dark for a moment, then blazed back to life in deep purples and reds. They died in battle. Honorable deaths. Honorable deaths, Elena echoed, her smile turning absolutely frigid. Is that what you call it when a man is found in his locked quarters, every bone in his body broken, with a single message carved into the wall above his bed? Is that what you call it when a general's flagship simply vanishes with all hands, leaving only a distressed beacon broadcasting children's lullabies? The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. These were not public knowledge. These were classified military secrets known only to the highest levels of the Dominion fleet. You, Malachar whispered, his voice barely audible. You killed them all. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes confirmed his suspicion. I told you, Your Majesty, I used to be a problem solver. And after Kepler 442b, I had a very large problem to solve. She turned to address the assembled delegates, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various other classifications, I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's place in this galaxy. You see us as aggressive, expansionist, dangerous, and you're absolutely right. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. This was not the diplomatic rhetoric they had expected. But what you fail to understand, Elena continued, is that we're dangerous to our enemies. We're aggressive toward those who threaten us. We're expansionists because we refuse to be contained by those who would see us destroyed. She gestured toward King Malachar, who was still pressed against his throne like a cornered animal. His Majesty here decided that humanity needed to be taught a lesson, that we needed to be shown our place in the galactic order. So he authorized the murder of 30,000 innocent people. Her voice began to rise, carrying a note of barely controlled fury. 30,000 people who never fired a shot, who never threatened anyone, who were simply trying to build new lives on a distant world. And you want to know what happened next? The chamber was completely silent now. Even the ambient hum of the life support systems seemed muted. What happened next? Elena said, her voice dropping back to a whisper, was that I came out of retirement. What happened next was that every single person responsible for Kepler 442b learned what it means to threaten humanity. What happened next was that the Baba Yaga stopped being a myth and became a very real, very personal problem for anyone who thought humans were easy targets. She turned back to King Malachar, who was now visibly trembling. But I'm a diplomat now. I believe in peaceful solutions. So I'm going to offer you a choice, Your Majesty. Option 1. You formally apologize to the human delegation, provide reparations for Kepler 442b, and guarantee humanity's full membership in the Galactic Council with all associated rights and protections. The King's patterns flickered hopefully. And option 2? Elena's smile was absolutely terrifying. Option 2 is that I stop being a diplomat and return to my previous profession, permanently, and you become my next assignment. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every being in the chamber could feel the weight of it, the absolute certainty that this small human woman was capable of following through on her promise. The choice is yours, Elena said conversationally. But I should mention that I've already made contingency plans for option 2. Your personal security detail, your food tasters, your body doubles, your hidden bunkers on 7 different worlds. All very impressive, all very thorough, all completely useless against someone who once infiltrated a void Walker dreadnought, just to prove it could be done. King Malachar's pattern cycled through rapid sequences of color, his alien mind processing the implications of her words. You would start a war. The entire Dominion fleet would hunt you down. Hunt me down? Elena laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber like broken glass. Your Majesty, they've been trying to hunt me down for decades. The hegemony put a bounty on my head, so large it crashed 3 planetary economies. The Void Walkers declare me a threat to universal order. And yet here I stand, in the heart of your power, offering you a peaceful solution to what could otherwise become a very unpleasant situation. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a level that only the king could hear. Because make no mistake, Your Majesty, if you choose option 2, if you force me to return my old ways, I will not simply kill you. I will systematically dismantle everything you've built, every ally, every asset, every carefully constructed power structure. I will turn your empire into a cautionary tale told by survivors huddled around dying fires. The king's resolve finally cracked. What exactly are you proposing? Elena straightened, her diplomatic demeanor returning as if she had simply flipped a switch. I'm so glad you asked. First, an official apology to the human delegation and the families of Kepler 442b. Second, reparations in the amount of 50 billion galactic credits. Third, immediate cessation of all hostile actions against human colonies. Fourth, full recognition of humanity's territorial claims and expansion rights. And fifth, a formal treaty guaranteeing mutual non-aggression. The demands were staggering, the kind of concessions that would normally take years of negotiation to achieve. But given the circumstances, they seemed remarkably reasonable. And if I refuse? Malachar asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Elena's expression remained pleasant, but her eyes held the promise of annihilation. Then I will personally ensure that your death becomes the opening chapter of a very long and very bloody book. A book that will be written in the ashes of your empire and bound in the screams of your followers. The king looked around the chamber desperately, seeking support from his fellow delegates. But every being present had heard the stories. Every being present knew what the Baba Yaga was capable of. And every being present was suddenly very interested in examining the floor. Malachar began, then stopped. His pattern cycled through several colors before settling on a pale blue that suggested resignation. I accept your terms. Elena smiled, the expression warm and genuine for the first time since entering the chamber. Excellent. I do so appreciate reasonable beings. Now, shall we draft the formal documents? I have a dinner engagement at 7, and I'd hate to be late. The next hour passed in a blur of frantic diplomatic activity. Treaties were drafted, signatures were affixed, and the greatest military power in the galaxy formally apologized to humanity, while promising to pay reparations that would fund human expansion for the next century. As the final documents were sealed, Elena gathered her things and prepared to leave, but as she reached the chamber doors, she paused and turned back to address the assembled delegates one final time. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various classifications, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. I want you all to remember something as you return to your respective worlds. Humanity tried diplomacy first. We sent an ambassador, not an assassin. We offered peace, not war. But if you ever threaten my species again, if you ever mistake our desire for peace as weakness, if you ever forget what you learned here today. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the silent chamber. Well, let's just say that the Baba Yaga knows where you all live, and she never forgets a face. With that, Ambassador Elena Voss walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a room full of the galaxy's most powerful beings who had just learned that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the universe comes disguised as a diplomat with a pleasant smile and a talent for conversation. As the doors closed behind her, King Malachar slumped to his throne, his patterns dim and defeated. Around him, the other delegates began to whisper among themselves, their voices carrying a new note of respect when they mentioned humanity. The humans had won, not through superior firepower or technological advantage, but through the simple expedient of sending their most terrifying legend disguised as their most reasonable diplomat. In the corridors outside, Elena adjusted her uniform and checked her schedule. Tomorrow she had a peace conference with the Rigel Syndicate, and next week there were trade negotiations with the Centauri Republic. She smiled to herself as she walked toward the transportation hub. Diplomacy was such interesting work, almost as interesting as her previous career, but with significantly better hours and far fewer people trying to kill her. Almost. After all, one never really stops being the Baba Yaga. One simply learns to use words instead of weapons, most of the time, and in the depths of space. In the hidden corners of the galaxy where legends are born and nightmares take shape, the whispered stories began to change. No longer was the Baba Yaga simply a myth told to frighten children. Now she was something far more terrifying. She was a diplomat, and she was very, very good at her job.